Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hi, this is Jesse Mayshark with Compass at CompassKnox.com, and you are listening to the Compass Points podcast. This is a little bit of a note we wanted to put at the front end of this episode because we taped this week's episode Friday morning, and literally while we were taping it, reports came in of a student with a gun at West High School and a teacher who has apparently been grazed by a bullet. It's all still pretty vague what we're looking at right now. By the time you're hearing this, probably more information will have come out. However, we just wanted to go ahead and acknowledge this up front because, among other things in this episode, we do talk about this gun safety resolution that was at County Commission this week that was brought by some local high school students, including a student from West High School, as it happens. And so just wanted to acknowledge that. We don't really have anything we can say about it right now, Scott, but
it's too soon to know what truly happened, what everything that's involved, the things that people will know by the time they listen to this. But
we just wanted to we didn't want it to seem completely disconnected from what's going on in our community.
Yeah, we were just ignoring that. We don't want to give that impression. It's a serious matter, serious issue, and we just wanted to make sure that that we acknowledge that this has happened in the middle of the taping of the episode, and we will be following it.
Hello and welcome back to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, business, education, really anything that gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com. I am joined, as always, by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing on this gray Friday, Scott?
Well, it is gray. It is kind of depressing weather, but May Day, or Beltane is, if you will, is Monday. So
that's right.
We'll hopefully the skies will part and the clouds will part anyway, and the skies will be blue and the sun will be blazing, and we'll have a nice spring-like week.
These are the April showers that are going to bring us the May flowers, so we are told.
That rumor has it. Yes.
All right, well, we will see. Regardless of the weather, we did have actually a fair amount of news here on the local front this week. Not a surprise because we are at the end of April, which, as we have talked about before, is a busy time on the civic calendar, particularly with budgets. And we are going to be talking about some budgets this week. But there were some other things as well. There was an interesting announcement from the city and county about a joint initiative to deal with homelessness and housing affordability. And we actually have an interview coming up with Aaron Reed, who is the newly named head of the newly created Office of Housing Stability. We'll be talking about that. The Knox County School Board had two interesting votes, one on their budget, as we just said. Also, they revisited the charter school application that they had just voted on 3 weeks earlier. Talk about how that turned out. Knoxville Mayor India Kincannon presented her spending plan for the 23-24 budget year. not a ton of surprises there, but we will run down what's in it. But to start us off, Knox County Commission met last Monday. We talked about this a bit last week. They had a resolution before them, basically showing support for Governor Bill Lee's efforts to do something about gun safety. And it got a little bit tangled up because in the initial version of it, it was really just showing support for the governor. He had come out and said that, first he had issued an executive order to speed up some data entry for the background checks that they use to make sure that people purchasing guns haven't been convicted of crimes and are, legally allowed to have weapons. But more significantly, he had called for some kind of legislation that would create mental health orders of protection. And at the time that the initial resolution was presented, Governor Lee hadn't presented any real details of that. So the initial resolution just kind of said, we support the governor's call. Then when he did release details of that proposal, the county commissioners who were sponsoring it, Commission Chair Courtney Durrett and Commissioner Dacia Lundy, said they weren't actually 100% on board with every single thing that he was proposing. They didn't go into the details. But so they changed the resolution a little bit to just express support for the state taking action, essentially, to make it harder for people in mental health crisis, people who may be a threat to themselves and others, to get access to firearms, and even to have to give up firearms if they were found to be a threat. And as we talked about last week, this resolution really was initiated by a group of local high school students, several of whom had been participants in the junior commissioner program through County Commission. And so, not surprisingly, given what we've seen of this issue and the dialogue across the state, it got mired in politics, for want of a better word.
Yes.
Gun issues in general tend to be, fairly controversial. We do live in a Republican-dominated county, and county commission is particularly Republican-dominated. This is a point I like to make periodically, just to remind people. We talk about gerrymandering at the state level, where, of course, we have a legislature that is in the House of Representatives about 75% Republican, even though the state as a whole is maybe 60 to 63% Republican. On Knox County, as we have talked about, tends to vote about 35 to 40% Democratic, sometimes even more than that. County Mayor Glenn Jacobs got reelected with just about 55% of the vote. So sometimes the countywide Democratic vote can be as high as 45%. County Commission has 11 commissioners, 2 Democrats. That's, if I'm doing my math right, about 18% of County Commission is Democratic. Now, that's partly skewed because we have 2 at-large seats, and those are both Republican, and that's kind of what you would expect because the county as a whole votes Republican, so the at-large seats are going to be Republican. However, even if you back out those, that still leaves you with 2 out of 9 commission district reps who are Democrats, which is still only about 22% of the commission. And so Democrats on county commission are really underrepresented. Now, this isn't, I think, unlike at the state level, because we just went through redistricting the other year, it's a little harder to say that this is specifically because of gerrymandering. The way they drew up those districts most recently did not seem particularly engineered to give partisan advantage. A lot of it has to do with just the way votes are kind of concentrated. Many more Democratic voters concentrated in the city areas. And so the couple of districts that have Democratic reps have very high Democratic turnout, and they are, relatively compact districts. They're a little bit snaky, but it's as much a function of kind of where people live as a deliberate effort. Nevertheless, the result is we have a county commission that is just like overwhelmingly Republican in a county that is not, in fact, overwhelmingly Republican. And when that shows up is when we get issues that tend to break down along partisan lines. Gun issues are very much one of those, as we all know. And so the number of votes that there are on county commission to maybe take a serious look at gun safety really does not represent the number of people in Knox County, I think. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. I don't think county commission is very representative of the actual population of the county when it comes specifically to these kinds of issues. There have been polls done across the state showing actual widespread public support, both among Democrats and Republicans, for things like red flag laws. And I haven't seen any specific polling in Knox County, but Knox County is one of the more purple areas of the state. It's certainly a more divided county than a lot of our more rural counties. So there's no reason to think that those statewide numbers would not at least apply in Knox County. So I just always like to point out because we talk about these bodies and they are representative bodies, but I think it's important to keep in mind sort of how representative they actually are of the people who live here. Our current county commission, the way it's drawn up, just does not actually represent the ideological breakdown of the county. It just doesn't. And so that very much showed up in this case. This resolution got, it failed on a 7-3 vote. The two Democrats and Commissioner Larson J. And remember, of course, this was a resolution mostly supporting the Republican conservative governor. Nevertheless, several of the Republican conservative commissioners kind of made a point of saying, just because he's a Republican doesn't mean I'm going to support him, especially when it comes to gun issues. And they didn't. And Commissioner Carson Daly and Commissioner Rhonda Lee in particular, we're just adamant, like, we're not going to do anything to take away anybody's guns, period, point blank. I don't believe in it. We're not going to do it. Now, there was another resolution proposed, and I think some of the commissioners may be aware of those polls, maybe because of, their own sense that, well, maybe we ought to encourage. Of course, one thing we should say, Knox County Commission has zero authority to regulate firearms. The state has completely preempted firearm regulation across the state. They've basically said local governments cannot do anything to regulate guns. It's a state issue. So all county commission can do is kind of express its desires or the desires of the people it represents. But Commissioner Terry Hill, who's one of the Republicans, proposed an alternative resolution that was very short, just one sentence, basically saying the state should do something to try to limit the access of people in mental crisis to firearms. Did not say exactly what. And some of the commissioners now that resolution attracted 4 votes instead of 3. It got 1 more vote than the other resolution. But some of the commissioners who supported it said, I can support this language because it's not very specific about what we should do, but I don't support a red flag law, which is kind of what Governor Bill Lee has been pushing for. So leaves it a little bit unclear, if you're going to say we want some way to restrict access for people in mental health crisis, but we don't support the kind of one well-known legal mechanism that's out there to do that. Unclear what that other option would be. Yeah,
you would. I mean, there have been a lot of politicians across the state who said, the problem's not guns, the problem's mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, if that's the problem, propose something.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the only thing that's been proposed is well, Lee doesn't like calling it a red flag law, but that's
right.
What it is. But that's the only thing that's been proposed. There are such laws in other states, and but if there's, it's kind of one of those things. I mean, these politicians are the leaders of our state. They are the ones, who have been tasked with coming up with solutions. And if the problem is mental health, then come up with a solution. Don't just say, it's kind of, you wonder, okay, well, what do you want to do?
Right.
And it's not, it can be confusing and and almost assures that nothing gets done.
Well, and there's a lot of focus right now at the state level on this particular shooting at Covenant School, the particular shooter. The focus Governor Lee has said he's going to call a special session of the legislature to try to kind of continue to discuss, wrangle with these issues. And some of the Republican leaders in the legislature have said, we are absolutely not going to talk about this until we know more about this shooting. And what they're specifically saying is they want what is being called a, quote, manifesto written by the shooter to be released by the Nashville police. And Nashville police have said Governor Lee actually called for that this week, I think, kind of realizing that was going to be a stumbling block to him being able to even, call a special session and get any traction at all. And so he also called on the Nashville police to release it. I think that, that initial word manifesto was used in a very early police report about this, kind of saying, we found a manifesto. Since then, David Roush, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation director, has kind of walked that characterization back a little bit and said, it's more kind of a collection of writings and plans and so forth. I think there's a lot of interest on the right in this manifesto because the shooter was apparently transgender. That remain exactly how the shooter identified themselves remains a little bit murky. But also, of course, they attacked a Christian school. And so in some of the rhetoric that you're seeing on the right, I think there's this sense that, what this manifesto is going to show is that this was, an ideological transgender attack on Christians. I don't know. Maybe that's going to show that. I have no idea what's in there. I do think that, Deborah Fisher, who's the executive director of the Tennessee Coalition on Open Government, came out this week and said, yes, these records are public records and they should be released. Clearly, there's a lot of public interest in them. And I think after any of these shootings, there's always a very natural inclination to say, well, who was this person and why did they do this? So all of that's understandable up to a point. I think the way it's being framed on the right is a little bit this sense that, what this is going to show is that our problem is transgender people, or our problem is anti-Christian hatred or something. And like, those are the things that we need to focus on rather than guns. I don't know what these documents will show. I do think it's worth saying that we've had many mass shootings in this country. Some of them have had ideological, motivations. We've certainly
the Tennessee Valley Unitarian Universalist Church shooting,
for example,
here in Knoxville,
right?
Was an ideological shooting.
He said he was going to go out and kill some Democrats or some liberals. I think was his statement. And we've had white supremacist shootings. We've had obviously anti-gay shootings at gay clubs and so forth. And then we've had plenty of shootings where it's never been clear what the personal motivation was. The Las Vegas, the horrible shooting in Las Vegas, which I think remains the single worst of these kind of random mass shooting incidents. As far as I know, we've never had a real clear explanation. And so while, I think it's worth knowing what was in those, I think the idea that then you come and, whatever policy response we're going to take as a state hinges entirely on what was in this one clearly mentally disturbed person's writings.
Right. And one of the things is the writings could just reinforce the notion that this person was mentally disturbed,
right?
And is that the family had concerns.
Yeah,
I mean, this case is one that would be addressed by a red flag law, or could have been addressed with a red flag law,
right? The family members have actually said they tried to take guns away from her or him. Again, the gender identity remains a little murky here. A lot of news reports are referring to the shooter as her. Audrey Hale was the given name. So anyway, that's all kind of sitting out there. Probably, I'll be surprised if those records don't get released in the near future. There's a lot of political pressure for them. And, it's hard to make the case for the police that there's some ongoing investigation because as far as we know, this was a single person involved and the person who did it is dead. Yeah. There's not going to be any prosecution there. So I think those will come out, but all of that kind of shows, and it was reflected in the discussion at County Commission, that the ideological lines on this issue are starkly drawn and make it hard to, have a really comprehensive discussion about it. You tend to get people who kind of want to only talk about guns. You get people who want to talk about everything but guns. And it's even if and when Governor Lee calls this special session at the moment, it's a little hard to see where there's going to be a lot of, traction on any of this. Regardless, if and when that special session gets called, it will not have, at least at the moment, it will not have a resolution from Knox County Commission saying, here's what we think you should do. Now, I have heard a little bit of discussion since this meeting last Monday that, maybe some other kind of resolution could come back next month. Interestingly, the three people who supported the original resolution, Durrett, Lundy, and Jay, did not vote for the alternative resolution from Hill because they were still trying to get the original resolution passed. Maybe if something like Hill's resolution got brought back as the only option, those votes could be there to support that. So it's still possible Knox County Commission comes back and does something. But for the moment, and I talked to some of the students who'd been involved in putting this resolution together after the meeting, and they were disappointed, but I think kind of not surprised after the discussion they had heard the previous week that there wasn't support for it. And, I asked them, well, what are you guys going to do now? And they said, well, we're going to keep marching. We're going to keep showing up. We're going to stay engaged. This is something that especially young people across the state have said about this particular issue in recent weeks, that, this time we're not going to forget. We're not going to go away. I guess we'll see. We'll see whether this is some kind of turning point on this issue that produces a mass movement that stays energized and organized, or not. Okay. Mayor India Kincannon, she made her budget announcement this week. She did not ask for a tax increase. And not only did she not ask for a tax increase, Scott,
she did not even utter the word tax in her State of the City address, which was and she didn't even take the opportunity to kind of pat herself on the back saying we're not going to raise taxes. I mean, it just wasn't even. It not only wasn't on the table, it wasn't in the kitchen. It was still at the supermarket, I guess. So, but yeah, I mean, it was every year mayors go out somewhere in the community and have a luncheon, and in this case it was up right above Western Heights, Beaumont Ridge, which if you've not been up there, there's an absolutely stunning view of the city of Knoxville from up there. It's really really nice. It's up by Rural High School is up there. And anyway, we were there was a big gathering there, lots of dignitaries, some our 2 or 3 state senators were there. A lot of and of course city council members were there because they're going to vote on it. But anyway, the budget itself was I think pretty bland. I mean, there were no big initiatives. If you recall last year, there was the big overhaul of the city pay structure, which cost a lot of money, and and was one of the main drivers behind the property tax increase that passed last year. And so, compared to last year, especially, this one was particularly bland, and probably that was the way that the mayor probably liked it, because she's running for reelection, and it's very difficult to get a property tax increase passed during an election year, and four council members are too. But the budget is, I mean, there's some increases in areas, and there are, and everything is maintained the way it is. It was kind of an interesting thing. On the revenue side, one of the interesting things was that they're basically last year got $41 million in state and federal grants were associated with pandemic response. That money goes away as the capital improvements budget is going to be cut more than half. And they knew this was coming. I mean, it's not a big surprise. But the general fund budget, which covers most of the operations of city government, is going up about 10%. So it was, all in all, when you balance it out, the overall budget is up about 1%, which is the overall budget. Also includes transfers that are counted twice. The net budget is actually down slightly.
So the confusing things about the city budget is there's sort of three different budget numbers.
Yeah. You throw the budget numbers around, but I tend to rely on the net budget number, and the net budget is $432.9 million. That's about $1 million less than it was. I say last year. For this fiscal year, this budget, of course, is for next fiscal year, which begins July 1st. Some of the highlights of it. One of the things that and we'll talk about this more is affordable housing. There is the Affordable Housing Fund, which is where the city puts its local tax dollars. A lot of dollars for affordable housing come from the feds. But the city council a couple of years ago passed an ordinance requiring them to spend at least $5 million a year over the next 10 years on affordable housing. This year was $8 million. Next year it's going to be $7.5 million. And then there's some other things that they're paying for that are addressing issues that have been prominent in the past year or two, violence reduction measures, especially to area nonprofits that are and organizations that are doing that work. Is $1.3 million. And then one of the interesting things that they're doing is this isn't really costing them a whole lot of money. They're adding 2 positions, but they're combining the community development department with the community safety department. Community development does a lot of neighborhood issues things, and then the community safety, of course, is focused on things like the violence prevention aspect. Mayor Kincannon said that those are kind of go hand in glove, and it makes sense to combine the departments. It was kind of also kind of if they were going to do that, a good time to do it, because Charles Lomax Jr. was the head of the community development office. He left to be the head of the Knoxville area urban league, and so that position was open. And so what they're going to combine those departments, in LaKenya Middlebrook, who's the head of the safety department, public safety department, community safety department, is going to be the head of the combined department. Mm-hmm. And also there was talk about the combined office of housing stability, the city county venture. We'll talk more about that later. But there was also there's also that as an initiative. Neither one of those is going to cost a huge amount of money.
It's more kind of moving things around.
Yeah, it's moving parts around, and it's there's a lot of one of the things that that people talk about city government and budgeting, and we could cut this and cut that. Almost 40% of the city budget is salaries and benefits, and so it's that's a big driver, and one of the big drivers of the increase in the general fund budget is the restructuring of the pay scales,
right? Because the general fund budget is like 70% salaries.
Yeah, it's just about all salaries. Yeah. So, but all in all, it's a fairly straightforward budget. No taxes, no tax increases. We said, and next week, City Council will take it on first reading, and we'll see how that goes.
And I think it being kind of a flat budget is something that we've also heard from Knox County. County Mayor Glenn Jacobs is going to be giving his own budget address in about another week, and County Chief Financial Officer Chris Caldwell has already said that they are looking at probably a kind of flat overall budget on the sort of general county operations side. And a lot of this is because people are we have been riding this big wave of particularly sales tax increases coming out of the pandemic, where, they were just kind of blowing budget expectations out of the water. That does appear to be moderating a bit as, we've seen the combined effects of inflation and then the rising interest rates to try to get the inflation under control, all of which is combining to tamp down spending a little bit. It looks like there is an anticipation of potentially a recession later in the year. And so I think all of our local governments are kind of looking at that and trying to be cautious as they budget for the coming year. Yeah,
the city's chief financial officer, Boyce Evans, basically said the same thing, that the sales tax, especially sales tax revenues, but property tax revenues are up. Of course, they raised property taxes last year, so one would think that they would be up a little bit, although they're not supposed to be. But they are up slightly.
Well, no, they're supposed to be up because they did actually raise the rate.
But they have that equalization thing, so it's not supposed to.
Well, but I mean, they raised it from the
baseline
before they did the equalization. Yeah. So you would expect to see, they raised the rate by about 20%.
Yeah. But the,
sorry for the financial nerdery here. I know that probably is hard to follow for people.
But anyway, but Evans has also, he also has talked about the effects of inflation. And in the city's case, the pension obligations, they're going up too. So it's kind of one of those things. And he basically saying, hey, yeah, revenues look really good, but we've got to be very careful. So I think it's a very conservative approach to on the spending side because of uncertainties associated with inflation and in combination with the rising pension costs.
Well, one local budget that is not flat going into next year is Knox County Schools, which does constitute actually the biggest part of the Knox County budget as well. And so, as I was saying, I think we're going to see, we'll see when Mayor Jacobs makes his presentation, but probably relatively flat on the part of the budget that is under Mayor Jacobs, and like the sheriff's office, everything that's not the school system. I think they're anticipating, kind of a no-frills budget. The school system, however, because this is the first year of full funding of Governor Lee's new Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement formula, which I have heard variously, the acronym is TISA. Some people say TISA, some people say TISA. I haven't heard anybody say TISA yet. I wish that somebody would decide how we're supposed to say this. I'm going to go with TISA because it rhymes with visa.
Maybe you can do that.
All right,
just take ownership of it, Jesse. Come on.
TISA. TISA sounds weird. I feel like TISA should be with a Z or something. TIZZA. That sounds like maybe an R&B singer or something.
Yeah. Well, it also sounds like they're in a tizzy.
Right.
Or
yeah.
something
Exactly.
like that,
However you pronounce it, it is providing a good chunk of money. Governor Lee committed as part of this that there was going to be essentially an extra $1 billion a year in state funding put in. And so this coming year is going to be the first full year of that for Knox County schools. That means that their budget is going from in the current year, the adopted budget is about $591 million, is going all the way up to $668 million, a $77 million increase year over year. It's a 13% jump, the largest in school district history that they know of. And a lot of that money is going, well, it's really going two places. A good chunk of it is going towards salary increases, and across the board, 4% raise for all district employees. And then on top of that, another 8% raise for some of their lowest paid employees. So teachers and administrators are going to get that 4%, but custodians, cafeteria workers, clerical staff, educational assistants, they're getting the extra 8%. So they're actually going to see a 12% increase. And then another big chunk of that money, about $24 million of it, they're putting directly into capital spending, and they're going to use it to pay up front essentially for some energy improvement initiatives that they had already planned to do anyway. They're planning to bond those out and pay for them over time. What they're going to do instead is just like pay cash essentially for that project, which will, first of all, save them on paying interest on those bonds. They said that over 20 years, it's going to save the school system about $14 million in interest payments they would have had to make. But also, that means that that's $24 million that they're spending on a one-time thing this year. That money will still be there in the next year's budget because this state allocation, repeats year after year. And what they're not going to see, they're getting a 13% jump this year, which that's basically resetting the baseline for the state funding formula. However, school finance people say that that's the new baseline, so they're going to get that year after year. But under this formula, they don't think that future years' growth is going to be all that much. It might just be 2 to 3%, which means in some years it might not even keep pace with inflation. And so what they're trying to not do is load up the budget with a whole bunch of new recurring expenses, which will then get more expensive year after year in ways that could strain future budgets. And so what this means is when they come into their budget planning next year, that's, $23.8 million that they're spending this year on one-time things. That money will still be there next year and essentially unallocated. So they'll be able to use that money in future years to pay for raises, to, pay for recurring ongoing expenses, basically giving themselves breathing room in future years where they are not confident that they're going to be getting, these big increases from the state. So the budget was not particularly controversial. When you get a big windfall, people on the school board are basically happy. They're getting all this money.
I'm happy when I get a windfall.
Yeah.
I can tell you that.
No kidding. But there was some discussion about the raises and whether they were doing enough, particularly at the lower end. And school board chair Christy Christie said that she was concerned that they weren't doing enough, in particular for their school security officers. We talk about armed guards in Knox County schools, and there's basically two different kinds of those. There are the school system's own officers, which are the school security officers or SSOs, and then there are the school resource officers, which are the sworn officers of the Knoxville Police Department, Knox County Sheriff's Office, who also put officers in schools, and they pay for those officers. The school system pays for its own officers. The school system has at least one SSO in every school, and then in middle and high schools and in some elementary schools, we also have KPD or KCSO officers. So Christie said that she wanted to move those officers, the school system's officers, up to the 12% level as well, instead of just the 4% that they were getting under Superintendent John Ryswick's proposal. And school board members supported that. It was going to cost about another $400,000. And district officials said that they don't even need to add that to the budget line. It's a $668.3 million budget. And within that scope, basically, Chief Financial Officer Ron McPherson said, there will be $400,000 of leeway in there that we can use to do this, whether that comes from unfilled positions or other savings they have during the year. And so
it's kind of funny that you can find $400,000 in what is essentially, changing the couch cushions.
Yeah. Exactly. When you have a going on $670 million budget.
Yeah. You have to put it in perspective there. I know a lot of people, sounds like, something sounds like a lot of money. Like $100,000 sounds like a lot of money. And it is a lot of money to an individual, but when you've got a budget that size, it's easily absorbed.
Right. Now, school board member Catherine Bike then asked if there was a way to do even more, especially for those custodians and the other real low paid workers who are at the bottom of, because that 12% raise for custodians, for example, current custodian entry level wage is $10.80 an hour, which has become really uncompetitive in the current labor market that we've seen as wages have risen over recent years. And so that 12% raise is only going to take that up to $12.20. It's basically $1.30 an hour extra. I'm sure that'll be welcome to the people who are getting it. It doesn't add up to a tremendous amount of actual money. And so Bike asked if they could also consider then adding another $1 per hour wage to all of those lower paid categories. But McPherson said that would cost about $3.7 million. And even in a $668 million budget, that's still somewhat real money. And he said that could not just be absorbed within the budget. It would need to, they'd have to look for places to cut or where to reallocate. And so Bike made that proposal. It did not get support from a majority of the board, but several board members said they would be open to coming back in a couple months once they have final funding numbers from the state, and also once they have final year-end numbers from this year's budget to kind of see what they might have in reserve. And if there is money there, maybe they could come back and do bonuses, one-time incentive kind of payments for those lower paid workers that wouldn't add to their ongoing recurring expenses, but would also probably make those workers happy and more likely to stay, because they're having trouble both attracting and retaining people, particularly in those custodial jobs. We've talked about that, but really in all of those low paid jobs. For the same reason, a lot of people in the current marketplace are having trouble finding workers. I mean, we're hearing this across the board, especially in lower paid positions. So that discussion may return in a couple of months once they have some firmer budget numbers. However, for now, they went ahead and passed the $668.3 million budget. That now goes to Jacobs to be incorporated into the broader county budget, which he will be presenting in the coming weeks, and we will talk about that for sure. The school board also did something else on Thursday. They had two special called meetings back-to-back on Thursday. One was for the budget vote. The other one was to basically do a do-over on their consideration of a charter school application from Knoxville Preparatory School. We talked about this earlier in the month. The board had deadlocked 4-4 on that application. Some board members had concerns about what they called data discrepancies in the application, and also concerns about the amount of community engagement that had been done. The organization that is going to be operating this school is called Prep Public Schools. They're based in Chattanooga. They're a nonprofit. They operate one very similar school there, Chattanooga Preparatory Academy, which is or Chattanooga Preparatory School, Chat Prep as they call it, Chat Prep and Knox Prep. And it's an all-boys school, grades 6 through 12. That's what they're planning to do here as well, an all-boys school going to be opening in the fall of 2024 with a 6th grade class, and then they'll be adding grade levels each year until they run all the way middle school through high school. This would be only the second charter school in Knox County. We have Emerald Academy. It would be the first charter high school because Emerald Academy is elementary and middle school. And the reason that the board tied 4-4 at its April 6th meeting was that board member Susan Horn was absent. She was back for this special called meeting. And as I think pretty much everybody expected, she voted with the rest of the 5-member Republican majority on the board to approve the application. And there was some more discussion this week, but they had hashed it out pretty well earlier in the month, and kind of nobody's positions had really changed. The same 4 who voted against it at the April 6th meeting voted against it again with the same concerns, and the same 4 who voted for it and were joined by Horn. So it has now been approved, and they are, going to move forward with getting the school, the program ready. They're going to be based, at least for now, it's not clear if this is going to be the long-term permanent location or not, but at the Boys and Girls Clubs building on Irwin Street in North Knoxville. And Brad Scott, who's the CEO of Prep Public Schools, said that they will be holding community engagement meetings to kind of both build interest in the school and also hear more from the community about what kinds of things people want to see there. Of course, they've already proposed their program. That's pretty well laid out, but he said they still want to hear more feedback about specific needs and things people are interested in. And parents who are interested in that school, if you're a parent of a student who will be entering 6th grade in the fall of 2024 and are interested in this, you can go to their website. I think it's knoxvilleprep.org, get information about the school, and you can submit your interest in it there. And so, it'll be interesting to see. There was discussion, as there had been before, about the impact it's going to have on existing public schools, where it's going to pull students from. They are aiming to serve low-income students in particular. It'd be open to any boys in Knox County. It is an all-boys school. But they're going to be focusing, I think, a lot of their outreach and marketing efforts in sort of like the lower income urban neighborhoods. That's kind of the demographic that they serve in Chattanooga and that they want to do here. So we'll just kind of continue to follow that. This is still a relatively new thing for Knox County, having charter schools.
Yeah, and one thing is when Emerald Academy started, it's the Emerald Youth Foundation was behind it. They're a local, highly respected, highly esteemed nonprofit. Everybody in office and in the community knows who they are and what they're like and everything else. It's a little different with this group because they're coming in from Chattanooga. They're outsiders, so there's a little bit of unfamiliarity there. I think that might be causing some people to be a little leery. And also, one of the things that you mentioned was that the public outreach. One of the things I've been hearing is that a lot of people in the areas that they're targeting for service are saying that the outreach effort has been less than stellar.
That was a concern that board member Daniel Watson raised, and he said one of the reasons he voted against it was that he had talked to people who had initially been engaged in conversations with the school and then had kind of backed away from it. He didn't go into details about why or what specific concerns he was hearing, but he had some sense that he had concern that there wasn't sufficient engagement and support there from the community. Now, Brad Scott, when I talked to him, said that some of that conversation was coming from community leadership levels, and that while they would like engagement and support from community leaders, for example, the Knoxville chapter of the NAACP, which came out against the school, raising concerns about its impact on other schools in those districts. But he said that their real focus is on parents and on families. They already have 70 plus letters of intent, and they're going to aim to open with about 107 students is going to be their capacity for that 6th grade class. And so, his sort of explanation for that was that, our focus is directly with parents and families, not as much with kind of like community leaders or organizations. But I think you're right that, first of all, there is just a lot of skepticism among some people, philosophically and otherwise, about charter schools and their potential to pull students and resources away from traditional public schools. but also, of course, when you're dealing just with a group and an organization that people don't know and don't have experience with, that's just going to heighten that. So it will obviously be incumbent on prep public schools to go out there and try to address some of those concerns and really to generate enough interest for people to come to their school. Because the point that they made and that Susan Horn made in explaining why she was voting for this was that ultimately this is totally voluntary. It is a school of choice. Nobody has to go there. And so it's going to be up to them to fill up their classrooms or not. If they don't attract enough students, then they only get state funding for the students they have. And so if they don't attract enough students, they won't have the funding to do the kind of school that they want. And it'll really be up to them.
Absolutely. If you don't bring enough kids in, you don't bring enough money in, you can't pay the teachers, it all kind of falls apart. And so I'm sure that they've done their due diligence, and they think that they can easily bring in enough students to make it worthwhile. And but we'll see. You wonder how many charter schools, community Knoxville size, can truly handle and thrive since those schools would thrive and not be have too big of an impact on the public schools.
Right. Well, an impact on public schools, to be clear, isn't something that the charter schools themselves have to worry about. Under state law, that's not even something that the school board can consider. And so it's up to charter schools to, get an application approved and then kind of see what they can do. And the public school system has to deal with it, basically. So
and the one thing that is interesting about that is you're talking about the money that goes with a kid, and once they get going and really that the school system doesn't get money, they're not held harmless. Is that if they get I'm sorry, what's the maximum number of students?
107, he said, per grade level.
107.
That gets you to it's going to be about a 750 student school by the time it's
full. If you take 750 students out of the Knox County school system, assuming they're spread across the school system, they're not all concentrated in one or two schools, that does nothing for the expenditures they're still going to have the same cost. Many of the costs are fixed.
Right.
Because if you go from a classroom of 25 students to a classroom of 22 students, you still have the teacher and the teacher's aide and everybody else. The whole fixed costs are going to be the same. It would only cause Knox County schools to reduce expenditures if so many students from one particular school went. They might lose a teacher,
right?
But everything else, everything from the administration to the heating and air to the number of custodians that we talked about would remain the same.
Yeah, and that is definitely one of the arguments that sort of skeptics of charter schools make, is that those fixed costs stay the same, and so that makes it makes the public schools potentially more expensive to run, which then potentially comes back to taxpayers because we're the ones who pay for all of these things. So somebody's got to pay the heating bills at all these schools, whether there are 627 students in them or 603 students, that bill is still going to be there. So, we will just see what all of those impacts are. Okay, let's talk about this Office of Housing Stability. This was an interesting announcement that came out from both the city and county governments this past week. What are they doing?
Well, what they're doing is they are taking the approach of housing stability, which is basically affordable housing, and homelessness, and attacking that jointly in a combined office that does a couple of things. I think it is acknowledges that it's a countywide problem, not just a city issue. A lot of people think it's just a city issue. One of the things a report that the county conducted last year had identified at least 13 known encampments of people experiencing homelessness outside the city limits in virtually all areas of the county. I think the only area that did not have one was far northwest Knoxville, the Hardin Valley area. Although I would guess that there are some up there too. These are only the ones that have been identified, and so I think it's an acknowledgement that it is a countywide problem. It affects everyone in the county, and also a tacit acknowledgement that this gets lost a lot of times. We've talked about this before. That sometimes there's this idea that city residents aren't county residents, right. And so it's an acknowledgement that when there's a problem in the city, it's also a problem for the county.
Yeah,
and city residents pay county taxes, and so some resources can go there. Anyway, what the office is sounds like it's going to do, and is basically build on what the city's done. The city has its own office on homelessness. It's not going away. It's staying. There's plenty of things the city does that the city focuses on in dealing with homelessness. But but one of the homeless program coordinators is moving to this new office, and but they're also looking at homelessness not as in and of itself, as part of an overall housing issue, and they're really emphasizing preventing homelessness through affordable housing. And as we all know, housing is at a premium at all price points across Knox County, and especially low income for low income residents. It's one of the reasons the city is putting $7.4 million of local tax money into affordable housing this year or next year, and so they're looking at that as kind of a continuum that if they're able to provide more affordable housing to prevent people from having to live in their cars and or go into full blown homelessness, then that will be that makes it easier to deal with people who are already unhoused, and makes that it and that's and that's really tough right now. I mean, one of the when people go through into the social services network that provides services to homeless individuals, they ask, why are you homeless? And overwhelmingly, it's that they either got evicted, or they couldn't find housing, or they lost a job and they lost their house or their home, and that's the primary reason for homelessness, and so that's a way of attacking that problem, and they're just doing. It's more of a holistic view of housing and making sure that people have shelter and a roof over their head and a place to live where they can hopefully make their lives better.
Right. Yeah. And, there have been studies done nationwide in the last few years, because housing affordability is a nationwide issue, because there's been such a run up in prices, both rental and purchase prices. And there have been several studies that have shown that areas with high housing prices also that pushes up your homelessness rate, which is sort of an obvious thing. Like, what makes people homeless? They can't afford housing. Yeah. But I think that does get lost sometimes, because we talk about other causes. We talk about mental illness. We talk about substance misuse and addiction. And those things certainly are present. But as Aaron Reed talks about a little bit in our interview, which we'll get to here in just a second. Those things can be symptoms of homelessness as much as they are causes of. They can be challenges to people getting into housing, but those in and of themselves are often not the sort of root reason that somebody becomes homeless in the first place. And so focusing on that affordability issue and how you keep people in housing before they become homeless, obviously is trying to address the problem at its root in a way.
Yeah, and one of the things that's kind of telling about that too is the city's personnel for this, which as I said earlier, it's coming from the Office on Homelessness in the city. On the county side, it's from the Grants and Development, Community Development Department, which does most of the housing stuff in the county. So it is that kind of dual approach to both prevention and treatment. It'd be essentially, if you want to put it in healthcare terms, and so that's really what they're going at there. This is building a lot on what the city has already done. The city's long had the mayor's roundtable on homelessness, and the county and then other stakeholders will be added to it, and it'll be essentially a roundtable of both mayors, and
it kind of represents a return of county government to focusing on this issue, because we did have back, 15 years ago or so, the Office of the 10-Year Plan to End Chronic Homelessness, which was a joint city-county effort that actually, I think people think of that these days as something that kind of failed because, A, it didn't end chronic homelessness, B, it didn't last 10 years. No. But actually, it did put in place a lot of things that are now the foundation for the work that's been done since, including the creation of the Homeless Management Information System, which is the kind of data system run by the University of Tennessee College of Social Work that provides data for all the service providers to use. It's given everybody a much clearer sense of the community, the population they're serving, than they had before. And so then the county had kind of pulled out of that for various reasons. And the city has, as you said, kind of been going it alone a little bit in terms of local homeless policy. But I think this represents a recognition by the county government that, yes, this is not just a quote unquote city issue, and it's really something that affects everybody and everybody has a stake in.
Yeah, one of the things, another thing too that the 10-year plan did, although it was supposed to go out further and, and more of it, but what it did was it took the concept of housing first, which was actually kind of controversial, because housing first, basically the philosophy behind it is you take someone who is unhoused, you put them in you get them housed, you get them in an apartment, and then if they have other issues like substance abuse, like mental illness, then you have social workers who go in and help them get that, or they may refuse them, but the main thing is they're housed. Like the problems, you don't have a house, okay, we'll give you a house. Not a house, shelter.
An apartment, right?
Apartment, and now that was very controversial because a lot of people were of the mind, well, you need to they need to be clean before they go into before you give them a place to stay and all that. But that's not the way it works in the real world. And what this did was it did at least create a test for that. We have two housing communities, Flanagan Landing in South Knoxville and Menville Manor at the old Fifth Avenue Motel downtown, and they've proven over the years to be effective. In fact, the city now has, I believe, 6 that have been approved so far. In fact, one new project is in the city's budget for next year, was recently approved for veterans who've been chronically homeless.
Mm-hmm.
So, and over the years, in Knoxville and in other communities, that's kind of become, the standard now is this housing first model, and it is all about providing housing and keeping people in, their existing housing, as the best way to keep people from slipping into being unhoused.
Right. Well, let's hear more about all of that from Erin Reed, who was hired as the director of this new office. And she comes from the Knox County Health Department, where she'd been working most recently on substance misuse issues. But she sat down with us to talk about all of this.
This week's guest on Compass Points is Erin Reed. Erin is the newly appointed head of the Office of Housing Stability, which is a joint city-county effort to address affordable housing and homelessness issues. And welcome aboard.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Glad you could join us. Listen, the first thing that I wanted to get from you is our readers or listeners might not know a whole lot about you. What is your background?
Well, I worked at Knox County Health Department until just recently for 12 years. Initially, I started working there doing community level strategic planning, and then moved into a role with substance misuse response. I helped stand up our not ours anymore, the health department's substance misuse response division. I was its first division director, and really miss my team over there.
Well, this is a new challenge for you. So why are we doing this? What is the purpose behind the Office of Housing Stability?
Well, so the main purpose of the office is to bring a more expansive collaboration to this issue in our community. So I think most people who've lived in Knoxville for a decade or more have noticed how the distribution of encampments, homeless encampments, has changed over that time. And I think that people are have been for several years now, realizing that it is not just a city issue, that it's the whole county, and that we've got to work together. We've got to work together to try to address it.
Well, what in general? 'Cause I know this is just starting up. So, what in general will this office be focused on?
Well, 2 words: coordination and alignment. We're going to be bringing in more partners. I mean, county government is the most obvious one. Bringing in more partners and trying to make sure that that resources that different organizations are able to offer are working in alignment, so that they know, each organization knows what the other is doing, and that they can refer people back and forth quickly and easily and efficiently. And there's actually a lot of systems, data systems that can help support that we already have in place because of the work of the City Office on Homelessness and the Knox County Homeless Coalition. They've been doing this work for many years, and they've really set us up as a community with there's a lot of good work happening, and we have a lot of the pieces in place already to do even better.
Can you talk a little bit just about the name, which obviously is deliberately chosen? I mean, it's not an office on homelessness, it's housing stability. And I guess what you're trying to emphasize there is that people tend to think of homelessness as kind of one thing. It's maybe you see tents under a bridge or something, but this is really an issue that spans from people who are housed but maybe in danger of losing housing, all the way to people who are maybe finding housing again after being homelessness. I guess just what does that name represent in terms of the mission?
Well, you've hit it on the head. It's an attempt to broaden that perspective and place the issue of homelessness within this broader ecosystem of housing affordability, housing attainability, just kind of reentering housing from a period of homelessness. So you're exactly right. The name of the office is specifically designed to help expand our consciousness around homelessness so that it's not just this isolated problem. It's part of a whole host of issues that we need to be addressing, and affordable housing stock is really one of those. Although I should point out, the Office of Housing Stability, at least at first, our main focus is going to be homelessness prevention and homeless services. I come from a public health background, and so we're always going upstream and asking, well, why does this problem exist? And so, in my mind, I'm going out and thinking about, well, how do we increase the stock of affordable housing? How do we, going even further upstream in people's lives, like, how do we prevent childhood trauma and adverse childhood experiences, which, increase people's risk for poor economic outcomes and poor health outcomes, including homelessness? So, that's where my public health brain goes. But to actually answer your question, the Office of Housing Stability will be focusing in on homelessness prevention and homeless services. But also we'd like to be part of the conversation around affordable housing stock.
Well, I think a lot of people would think that homelessness prevention is having affordable housing, because I think when we talked the other day for the article that we ran, you said this interesting thing that you said, that housing is the issue, that things like substance abuse or misuse and mental illness were just symptoms. Were not just symptoms, but they were more symptomatic than they were causing the problem.
Well, that's really true. I mean, the main causal factor behind homelessness, not just here, but anywhere, is housing, is lack of affordable housing, lack of attainable housing. And substance misuse and mental illness, I think they are, for many in the community, some of the most visible parts of homelessness. When you see needle litter, near encampments, or when you see someone, acting erratically on the sidewalk. Those are the times, I think, when homelessness really intrudes on the consciousness of people who would rather not think about it. But as you said, they are substance misuse and mental illness are as much symptoms of homelessness as drivers. So it is, it's hard for someone who lives in a home to imagine that there's an environment where, for example, taking meth could be an adaptive behavior. If you're living on the street and, you might eat once a day, so you need to be able to suppress your appetite. Things are not really safe at night. You need to be able to stay awake for safety reasons. Once you think about it in that way, you start to see how taking meth could become an adaptive behavior in that environment. And that's what I mean when I say that substance misuse and mental illness, they can be drivers of homelessness, but they're also symptoms.
Well, and so to follow up on that a little bit, in terms of misconceptions that people have about homelessness, and I think there are a lot of them. Certainly when I worked at the city, we dealt with constantly hearing from people that there's kind of this sense that homelessness somehow wasn't our problem, that people were being shipped in here from somewhere, which is something I know, like every city in the country, people say this, right? And I know that the studies that have been done over time show consistently that no, like most of our homeless population here at any given time are people who are from Knoxville, Knox County, from the surrounding region. So when you talk about kind of who you're serving here, this is our problem, right? These are like our people. This is not something that's being imposed on us from somewhere else.
Well, you're right. And so if you look in HMIS, and they have this great community dashboard on their website that's available. I mean, you'll see that 70% of individuals who are accessing homeless services, which is thousands and thousands of people every year, 70% of them report a last permanent address, a zip code in Knoxville or in Knox County. So you're absolutely right. The phenomenon of homelessness in Knox County, by and large, is not one of us being a magnet for individuals from out of the county or even out of the state. I mean, there are individuals from out of town, but the majority of them are people who became homeless here. So that's one of the big myths. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the big myths that I would love to bust, is that it's somebody else's problem that's just migrated here. It's not the case.
Yeah, and to add to that, one of the interesting things is there was a report on homelessness in Knox County that was issued in December, and you mentioned that 70% are from Knox County, but to go back to it's also a county, an unincorporated part of the county problem as well as it is the city issue, and that same report had, and this was from stats from 2020, 622 individuals whose last address was in unincorporated Knox County. I'm assuming Halls, Powell, Garnes, the Carter community. So that kind of speaks to more of those misconceptions.
No, it really does. And I think that we are seeing encampments over the past decade kind of move outward and become more visible, especially in unincorporated parts of the county. I think, I don't know, I'm grateful that it has stirred a little bit more awareness on the community. I think really it's one of the reasons the office was created. It also makes delivering services really complicated, as you can imagine, especially because people in encampments, the incentive structure created by, state laws and regulations is for that they don't want to be found, because no matter where they camp, it's illegal, especially since last year when the state passed another law making it illegal for people to camp on local government-owned property. Pretty much no matter where they go, they do face the threat of legal action or arrest. So, and I will say that there's not a whole lot of arrests that happen for violations of that law. That is something that's important to point out. But the law is there. And so it does create this incentive structure to set up camp in places where you are hidden and cannot be seen, hopefully, and cannot be found. And for outreach workers or for a street medicine team, that's one of my dreams, is a street medicine team or a backpack medicine team. It just makes it really difficult to deliver services. And don't even get me started on HIV care. HIV is, we do have a spike in HIV cases locally over the past couple of years. And there's a high correlation. There's a high correlation with injection drug use in that cluster of HIV cases. And a lot of those individuals are not in care. And that's part of the reason a lot of them are not in care, is that they don't want to be found. And so delivering HIV care to someone who doesn't want to be found, HIV treatment is a regimen of daily pills. And it makes it very difficult.
So there's been an adoption locally of the housing first kind of model and approach, going back to the old 10-year plan, which I think kind of ended about almost, a little over a decade ago. But I know that has continued to be kind of the guiding idea, certainly for the City Office of Homelessness. And the big challenge there has always been just providing enough supply of permanent supportive housing. Is that going to continue to be a focus of this office? And if so, I guess, what all are you going to incorporate in terms of past lessons? Because our community has been through some pretty strong fights in the past over how you approach that and not turn it into a big fight. Like, I mean, what it boils down to is people traditionally have not wanted, like, people will agree in abstract, yes, we need more housing for homeless folks, but we don't want it in our neighborhood. So does that remain kind of a focus of this work overall? And B, how do you approach that given how difficult it always is?
Well, that's a great question. There's a lot of different factors at play here. The Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, that funds a lot of our homeless services programs, including several of our permanent supportive housing facilities here in town. One of their priorities is to encourage the construction of more permanent supportive housing. And it's also one of our priorities because, if you look back in HMIS and in the 10-year plan, there was an estimate for how much permanent supportive housing we would need as a community, and we haven't reached that level yet. So we definitely need more permanent supportive housing. It's one of HUD's priorities. It's definitely going to be one of the priorities of this office. Stepping back a little bit and talking about Housing First. So Housing First is the specific policy of HUD. They want to see HUD funded communities, which, I mean, pretty much every community that has the wherewithal to apply has funding from HUD for these services. HUD wants to see Housing First be the policy of those communities. Housing First means housing is available to individuals who are chronically homeless without preconditions. Preconditions could be something like, they need to have their schizophrenia medicated before they can get housing, or they need to have their substance use disorder under control before they can get into housing. The Housing First model says that those preconditions should not be used to deny people access to housing. And when I say housing, I don't mean congregate shelters. I mean permanent supportive housing, or other individual apartment style housing. And so, there is a lot of data behind Housing First that shows that it's effective. Doing Housing First right, the way that it is described in the textbooks, involves having access to a lot of services. A lot of communities, including Knox County, it's hard for us, especially around mental health services. It's really hard for us to have the resources to provide mental health services to everyone who needs them community-wide, let alone individuals who are coming out of homelessness. So there's a lot of discourse nationally about the Housing First model and how it could be improved. So we're also having that conversation here locally. We're committed to Housing First. HUD's funding is in many ways contingent upon that commitment, but we also need to be thinking about ways that we can improve how the model functions here. And I hope I haven't said anything that's going to get me in trouble, because that's kind of a hot button issue for sure.
Yeah. I know. I hate to hit you with that one right out the gate, but it is one of the big challenges, obviously, and it's one that we've dealt with before in Knoxville and Knox County.
Well, one thing that you mentioned when talking with us the other day was bringing in more people who've actually experienced homelessness to the table to talk about to talk about ways to address it. That's something that you would put a priority on. Talk about that a little bit, because I think most of the input that the city has gotten anyway, for at least through their Office on Homelessness and their initiatives, is from the service providers and all from that side of the of it. And so, talk a little bit about what you want to see from that outreach to people who are experiencing homelessness or have experienced homelessness.
Sure. That's going to be a really important component of the work this office does. When I worked at the health department in substance misuse response, that was a big part of what we talked about, is how do we do a better job of bringing the voices of people who've lived through substance use disorder, or maybe even people who are currently in active chaotic use. How do we bring those voices into program planning? Because, as a person who has never experienced homelessness myself, I mean, I can sit there and design a program all day that I think would work for me. But if it's not going to work for someone who is actively homeless, then, I mean, it's not any good. So I would really love to create an advisory board, a lived experience advisory board of individuals who could help vet program plans, who could help vet materials, who could help us do a better job of tailoring services so that they'll actually be easy to use. Well, that's the ideal, is easy to use, but at least feasible to use for people who are actively experiencing homelessness. So that's something that we're looking into. Sean Griffith, who is kind of straddling right now, he's sort of with the City Office on Homelessness, but also working with my office, and will transition fully to my office in the next few months. Sean Griffith is doing a lot of work on that, on trying to figure out how we get that lived experience advisory board set up, and how we can make sure that, that we're hearing that voice in program planning. And I think that is something too. You had mentioned the sort of not in my backyard feelings around permanent supportive housing. I think by bringing voices of lived experience into the conversation, I think that can help alleviate some of those fears. Because, I mean, that's what not in my backyard, the NIMBYism, that's what it's based on, is this fear that, a drop-in center or a permanent supportive housing facility is going to bring crime and danger to a neighborhood. But, Justice Knox, y'all reported on Justice Knox and their Nehemiah Action Assembly last night. And that was one thing that Mayor Kincannon pointed out at that meeting, is she said, one of the big reasons that this, group of people under Justice Knox is so powerful is that it's a huge number of just regular people who can combat that, the fear behind this NIMBY impulse in our community, who can say, you know what, a permanent supportive housing facility is not going to bring crime to your neighborhood. It's bringing you new neighbors. So, I think that's a bridge too far for many people at this moment, but I hope that we'll make progress on that. And I think the voices of lived experience are going to be a big part of that.
Well, and another aspect of what you have said you want to do with the office is make it more data driven. And that's, I suppose you could use data to back that up I don't know the data myself, but I know Flanagan Landing, for example, in Vestal is it was opposed by some of the community when it was built, and that their fears of it bringing in crime have pretty much been alleviated. And the neighborhood association Vestal, or the Vestal Community Association, I believe it's the name of it, actually has embraced Lincoln Landing, and that's kind of an interesting turn of events down there. And I mean, is that something that you talk about the importance of using data and evidence-based information. Is that an example of what you mean by doing that? Is to help that inform your outreach?
Absolutely. That is an example. I think that our system of providers already does a good job in terms of collecting data. And I mean, we have the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS, housed at University of Tennessee, that is a huge asset because it gives us all kinds of information about trends in homelessness, about patterns in service use. That's one of the really big advantages of HMIS, is that it gives us ideas on how we can improve and change services so that they'll be used and be more useful. So absolutely, I want to focus in on being data driven. And part of that is I would really like to bring more providers into that conversation. This is alignment and coordination, right? Is to really use data to inform conversations about which providers are doing what, and how they could, maybe focus in, be more efficient, let another provider do X and Y, and they can just do Z. I mean, that's just an example. I'm in my first month of the job, and so I don't have a good sense yet for the particulars of this system, but I'm getting there.
All right. Well, that's probably a good place to stop. We could. It's such a huge and complex issue, or really a bunch of different issues that all kind of come together. So we could talk for a long time, but we should probably let you get back to actually doing the job. So I'm sure we'll be talking more in the future as this office moves forward, but thanks so much for joining us to talk about it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And thanks again to Erin for talking with us, and certainly we will be continuing to talk to her and follow all of those complicated and interrelated issues.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it actually ends up being structured, because there are a lot of different moving parts there that can be combined various ways, and they don't have all that kind of mapped out specifically. So following that and seeing how it comes together and how effective it may be will be something we will keep tabs on.
Absolutely. Okay, looking ahead to this coming week, we have some government meetings coming up. The school board, which had its special called meetings last week, is having just its regular old normal meetings this coming week. Monthly work session Monday at 5 p.m., voting meeting Thursday at 5 p.m., both of those in the Summer Place boardroom. Not a super exciting agenda, but they are going to be talking about something called applied behavior analysis, which is a form of therapy for people with autism, and particularly children with autism. And a group of parents has been coming to the school board in recent months, speaking at public forum. These are parents of autistic children, basically advocating to have this kind of therapy provided in schools, not necessarily by school personnel. Parents are saying, look, we'll get the therapist, we'll pay for the therapist to be there, but we want them to be able to be in the classroom because that's where they can make a difference in kind of working with autistic students, and that this is actually something that can help students with autism stay in a mainstream classroom instead of having to go to a sort of special education classroom. Lots of other school systems in the state and even in our area do allow this. However, Knox County Schools so far, as a matter of policy, has not allowed it. And school board member Catherine Bike has put this as a discussion item for the work session on Monday to kind of talk about, is this something that we could look at? And so I think that group of parents, which has been pretty active and pretty well organized, will probably also show up at that meeting to continue to advocate for it. And so we will probably be writing and talking about that in the coming week. And then City Council meets on Tuesday.
City Council meets on Tuesday, as we mentioned earlier. The top order of business is going to be first reading of the budget and setting the tax rate, which, as we also said, kind of be routine. That won't be controversial at all. But one of the things that will come up is, as we've spoken about before, Councilwoman Amelia Parker wants a little extra time between first reading and second reading, and the budget hearings that will be held the following week. She wants some extra time, so everybody, Law Director Charles Swanson said the appropriate time to do that would be when they vote on first reading, to give themselves extra time. So we'll see if they'll do that. Don't know how much practical difference that would make. It would enable, if someone has an amendment they want to make to the budget, they could do. That gives them time to actually formulate something based on the public input from the budget hearings or whatever. But of course, one of the things about budgeting is with City Council and the city budget, especially, is that council can't really do line items. They can only kind of do big picture stuff, so they'd have to move big chunks of money around at the departmental level in order to do anything. Now they can still do that, and we'll see what they do. But if if your beef is one, if you want to put more funding to one program and take funding away from another program, you can't dictate that to the city administration. So anyway, that's going to be up. There's also going to be consideration of this is something they have to do every year. We talk about affordable housing. When you take money from the federal U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, you have to have plans in place. The annual plan for next year is coming up for a vote on Tuesday. And also there's a payment in lieu of tax proposal for a building, and we spoke about this during before we came on. We don't know if it's the MAC building or the MAC building, but it's
the building's not even there anymore anyway.
It's not there anymore. It's the property of the building, and it's 200 East Fifth Avenue, just north of the old city, west of Hall of Fame Drive, and they're wanting to the developers wanting to redevelop that property and use a payment in lieu of tax deal to help with the financing. So they'll be voting on that as well, and those are kind of the highlights of the meeting. And I expect that the biggest discussion, if there's any, will be about the budget.
Mm-hmm. And then later in the week, the University of Tennessee Board of Trustees is doing something.
Yeah, on Wednesday, the Board of Trustees Executive Committee is going to meet. It's a virtual meeting. You can go to the Board of Trustees website and they'll be showing it there. Anyway, and there's not a whole lot that's on the agenda. The one thing that will probably be the most interesting is System President Randy Boyd is going to give a report, kind of an update. He does that at every meeting that he attends of the Board of Trustees or the various committees, the executive committee of the board. A lot of times he'll drop some news in there when he gives that report. So we'll be paying attention to that. The only other thing of substance they're doing is there's a managerial group that's required by the federal government when you get government contracts, especially through DOE, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, those things. And it's made up of mostly university officials, the president, the CFO, the UTK chancellor, various other, the director of the Space Institute. But what they're wanting to do is add an insider threat official, which sounds very ominous, but that's going to be added to that. It's a group. This managerial group is something that's, like I said, required if you get these types of federal contracts that no one knows about outside of UT and those federal agencies. So, but that's the only other thing on the agenda. So, hey.
And just little correction there. You said Wednesday, but I think it's actually on Friday.
I'm sorry, it is Friday. I'm sorry.
But you can find information about that and a link to the meeting at the Board of Trustees website if you are so inclined. All right. Well, I guess that wraps us up for this week. We will come back next week to talk about all of that and whatever else happens in the interim. And maybe it'll be sunny by then.
Oh, we hope so.
All right. Talk to you later. As always, thanks to Seth Barber for his production with Barbarian Productions. Our theme music is by Will Wright.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily, in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.